This is a really dynamic, fast-moving area, and it feels, for those of us who are really, really old like me, it feels a bit like the web in the mid-90s, that the knowledge, experience, expertise, ideas are distributed around the place. So I think that the networking function that Immersive UK want to perform, the role of places, the digital catapult, I think is going to be an increasingly significant player in this area with some of its interesting engagements around immersive. And what I'm now going to talk to you about is what's the role of research and both technology research and arts and humanities. So I've got to tell you a bit about this call, but since we're all gathered together, I wanted to set it in the context of what we're trying to do in terms of a creative economy research programme, particularly within the AHRC. So a lot of you will know that from the autumn, when the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund and with the Green Paper on the Industrial Strategy, there's an increasing coherence, hopefully, to UK research and innovation investment around key sectors. So you'll have seen announcements in particular sectors so far from the industrial strategy. So for the automotive sector, an investment in batteries, commitments to remotely piloted and autonomous vehicles in dangerous environments, and for new methods of drug discovery and drug development. So very traditional areas. One might think they feel like proper industries where people have proper jobs, not like a lot of the jobs that we've all had for our careers, which have been fun. But it's a rather, one could characterise it as a rather engineering approach to innovation and the role of research in industry. What there hasn't been that much mention of is the UK's creative industries. Now we know the creative industries pose a problem for government. There are unlike the automotive industry, you can't get 8 people round a table and find out what they think. You are more likely to get 80 people round the table and absolutely no common consensus between the different sectors. So the UK creative industries are fabulous, but from the point of view of policy are cacophonous. And that just makes it difficult and sometimes makes it not so easy for government to engage. However, and the experience, I suppose, a lot of us in this room who've worked in this field for a long time have is that over the last 15 years, the argument that the creative industries are important as a part of the economy is a done deal. It's a one argument. You will, through work from people like the Creative Industries Council, there's a common acceptance that the creative industries are important as a sector in their own right, but they also are growing faster in terms of jobs and in terms of value than other sectors of the economy. And increasingly you'll find politicians saying nice things about the creative industries in a way that those who work in the creative industries would kind of recognise. So in terms of importance, the argument is one. Now my experience having come into this role 6 months ago is that take that argument into the area of research and that argument is absolutely not one. It's not understood that research and investment in innovation in the creative industries drives value in the way that it is in medicine, driving value in healthcare, or in engineering, driving value in green energy. So the idea that an important part of sustaining and growing our world-class creative industries is investment in research and innovation is not one. And as an illustration, when Greg Clark became Secretary of State for Business and took over the industrial strategy, he was terribly, terribly excited about this and about our world-leading sectors. But as you see here, when referring to the research component of that, it's conceived as the science budget. So any commitment to research in the creative industries through the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund is seen as a footnote on the science budget. So that's a problem, I think, and it's a problem that I think we need to solve, and that may be about making the argument, but it also may be about perhaps reconceiving what we think of as research. So there have been some exceptions to that. So the case, I think, has been made, and it's perhaps the easiest to make, in those areas of the creative industries where technology plays a leading role. So investment in the graphics and special effects aspect of the movie business has been forthcoming. It's easy to conceive, it's very technological, and it drives and supports the growth of high-end TV and film. It's much less been the case to see those kind of arguments made around more traditional areas of the creative industries like performance, and when it comes to craft, so it's the jeweler, high-end jeweler Flora Bhattacharya. When it comes to areas like craft, you don't hear that argument made, despite even a solo jewellery designer having both global supply chains in their production and global distribution chains. And my favourite current statistic is, and why I keep banging on about craft is, so the craft sector, even on the most conservative measures, is between 2 and 3 times as valuable as the UK recorded music industry. UK recorded music industry has significant leverage on policy. Ceramicists and jewellers, not quite so much. So it asks the question, so what do we mean by creative research? So we've tried to think about this and divide it up into three kind of themes. So there's obviously research about the creative economy. I think we all kind of know what that is. It's about the dynamics of the creative economy, it's about how it works, it's about how skills develop. It also includes some, but perhaps not all, of the traditional academic study of the outputs of the creative economy, its products, its services. There's research with the creative economy, so that's kind of the growing interest in kind of co-design and new research methods where academic research and businesses work together. But perhaps there's a more interesting one, which is research for the creative economy. So this is the kind of research that would make that argument that there is an equivalent of kind of fundamental research, whether it's based in the arts and humanities or elsewhere, which contributes to the development of value further down the line, whether that is value in terms of economic value or whether it's cultural or social value. So that seemed quite smart. When I tried this idea out earlier in the year, Ed Hollis, who's the Director of Research at Edinburgh College of Art, reminded me this is exactly the tripartite division that Chris Frayling came up with when he joined the Royal College of Art initially as Director of Design. So Chris Frayling, he did a really great thing actually. When he joined as Research Director, he established his own journal and then wrote in issue 1, first article, what he thought the plan was. So he defined it as research into art and design, again, traditional, fairly easy, commonly understood. Research through art and design, so using the techniques of art and design for research. And then the crucial third one, the research for art and design, the stuff that moves the discipline onwards. So we're going to try and work with that. Now, in terms of the things that are, one of the things that's shaping our thinking about this is research about how the creative economy and the creative industries work around clustering. So this was Nesta's first go at this. We've had to be very careful showing this slide as we go around the country because we've been in several cities that weren't on this map. And obviously now we've gone from 9 when this was produced. Nesta's now list includes 43 creative clusters, which makes a much easier read around the country. At the end of the event, I'll say a few words about a big programme which we are now able to announce, although the public announcement hasn't happened yet, around creative clusters from the industrial strategy. AHRC invested in 4 knowledge exchange hubs to explore ideas of how the research with the creative economy, so these collaborative research methods. Very interesting work done. Do read the report. It's on a knowledge exchange model which has many strengths, but it also shows some weaknesses. So lots and lots of small, very innovative but very small projects. So the problem there being, how do we know if something works in the creative industries if it's small? So I think we're going to take some of those lessons and move them on forward. But this research call is really trying to explore the early stages of what new kinds of research for the creative economy. And the reason, obviously, to pick immersive experiences, and when I say immersive, please don't expect me to define what I mean by immersive. So anybody who asks that, I'll be going, well, what do you mean by immersive? So we're trying to be open-ended. We're trying not to pin these things down. Obviously, we've got to move on beyond the solo, VR headset models that dominate at the moment. That's the current existing immersive paradigm for many people. And for me, that means drawing on areas of the arts and humanities and creative practice from different disciplines. And this is, again, personal, like a lot of this presentation. For me, theatre is a touch point in this. Theatre is a truly immersive experience, whether or not it uses screens or projection. So what we're trying to do is think about projects or encourage partnerships to come together who can think beyond where we are at the moment. That doesn't mean we want people to make up stuff that can't be delivered. It means bringing partnerships together that can interrogate questions sensibly. And perhaps also to think about how we engage with and interact with knowledge and information and data. So I'd just like to show how committed the AHRC have been to this for many years. This was the reception area in Swindon, for those who've ever been to the research councils. And obviously, the idea of waiting to be interviewed about your big project, sitting in the middle of Stonehenge, is a source of inspiration to many. So I will also say, for me, one of the other touch points here is archaeology. So what's this call all about? So we've picked 3 themes that seem to us to be both rooted in the arts and humanities in terms of core research disciplines, but offer interesting questions and interesting possibilities for people to gather around the creation of new experiences. The thinking being that experiences are one of the defining qualities of the UK creative industries. We are amazing at creating narrative and experiences. We're pretty good at technology, but we are amazing at creating narratives and experiences, and in many ways it's those that we sell around the world, if you want to take a purely economic point of view. So these themes, memory, everybody will have their own idea about what the theme of memory is. So it could be in healthcare, it could be dementia, it could be cultural memory. But for me, one of the exciting areas, this is again not definitive, is memory-based institutions. So how can emerging immersive experiences change the nature of memory-based institutions and how we interact with the collections that they have? So if from the 18th century the model of the museum was to take, let's just say take rather than any other word, objects from around the world and bring them into a single space and then bring the audience to them, then what does the availability of immersive experiences do to transform that interaction between us and those collections? So this seems to me a very rich area, a lot of memory-based institutions, some of whom are here in the room, are already experimenting this in terms of what we can do now, but what would this do at a fundamental level? Second theme is place. So one of the joys of this job of going around and talking to lots of the research community is finding there are whole since you were last engaged in universities, there are whole disciplines that have grown up that you never heard about that are incredibly exciting. Environmental humanities being one for me. So for me, the interaction between data and geography and the potential that that opens up to tell new kinds of stories and create new kinds of experiences is incredibly exciting. So those experiences could be of a building, they could be of a locality. This is Museum of London's street map project from a few years ago, geolocating historic photographs so that you could see them in the location that you were standing and compare them with the real world. Or they could be the experience of a whole landscape. So this is the Bannockburn Interpretation Centre, developed largely by Glasgow School of Art, what's now called the School of Simulation and Visualisation. So this is an incredibly exciting area, I think, to create experiences, whether they're narrative experiences or educative experiences that combine data and place. And apologies, there are various people in the room who will suddenly see these slides and go, hang on, that was something we talked about ages ago. So there are people like that, yes, hi Nina. So Sutton Hoo, the reinterpretation of Sutton Hoo, which my friend Nina Pope, digital artist, is involved in, would be how do you bring a place alive when none of the artefacts are there? And indeed the major artefact, the historical artefact, the key one, the ship, indeed never really existed in any sense when it was discovered. So I'm very excited about place. I hope you are too, but this is purely what I think of it. So the third theme is performance. So again, people in the room, this is the RSC Tempest, which is a collaboration between the Royal Shakespeare Company, Imaginarium Studios, and Intel, has introduced a live motion performance capture, I must say performance captured character into what's a traditional theatre environment. So incredibly exciting potential here for using immersive experiences and technologies in the production of performance. But I think equally important, and perhaps even more disruptive, is how these technologies can contribute to the consumption of performance and our experience of audiences. So I think, again, for me, the work that's been done, whether it's in immersive theatre or some of those skills in escape rooms, in real environments, some of the lessons that have been learned about performance there and about audiences have a huge role to play in taking this forward. So, enough of the speculation. So, core scope. What we're trying to do? Well, we're trying to do something, as I indicated earlier, that's quite straightforward, but not very tied down. So we're trying to support people to build multidisciplinary research partnerships. So this is very much a building block of funding. So we want to bring, we think to interrogate some of these questions at any scale, we need input from multiple disciplines, from the arts and humanities, from the social sciences, from businesses, and my colleague Tom Trewhella from AHRC will be joining me later to remind me that when I say businesses, he means non-academic partners. But also from the STEM disciplines. So the knowledge to address these things at scale is distributed in different traditions at the moment. So the objective is to develop large-scale propositions. I just want to be clear, not to deliver them. We're not so mad that we think this funding is capable of delivering those large-scale propositions. What we want to do is to support people to get together, to understand each other, to get to know each other's disciplines, to maybe prototype, though prototype will mean different things to different people. If you come from a kind of design tradition, prototyping can still mean a number of different things, and the level to which you want to illustrate these things will be each partnership's to choose. But the core is to develop a research roadmap for future funding. So think of it as the output, the key output of this is a proposition that's more defined, that has the right partners, and that is eligible for future funding. There is an understanding that the area of immersive is absolutely key to the development of the creative industries. And the Creative Industries Council will be publishing their sector deal soon, and it will say that. So what we anticipate is large-scale funding down the line for these projects. And we've taken a decision. We had hoped to be able to launch this with both the development funding and the large-scale funding in place. But it will be in place from a variety of sources, but rather than delay, we decided to get the development funding core out there first. So again, building blocks. So what have we got? So we've got £2 million, equally contributed from the Arts and Humanities Research Council and EPSRC, 75k per partnership. So again, this is in many ways small, but it defines what we're trying to do. We're trying to support you to spend time with each other. This is thinking time, a lot of it, and to me, it's the bit that often doesn't get funded. Particularly to bring together new partnerships. We'd like you to do it over 6 to 9 months, and we're going to make the application process as slimline as we can. Tom's done a great job in slimming down the paperwork, but that turns out to be very, very difficult beyond a certain limit. So we're going to slim down the award process. So you're going to have to pitch. You're going to have to pitch to an expert panel, and we'll turn it around really, really quickly, rather than go out to peer review. There is another reason for doing it that way. My experience of multidisciplinary research calls going out to peer review is widely varying scores because people score it according to their own silo. It seems much better because we're essentially asking for relatively speculative concepts and teams at this stage to have the people in the room from the different disciplines so they can argue with each other. I think this is brilliant because of this, what you don't understand is this. So we get a more balanced view. Requirements. Because this is Research Council money, the lead applicant must be an academic partner or an independent research organisation. But we do want every proposition to have a business, to be defined in the Q&A, within that partnership as well. We think it's really very, very important. We want you to address the core themes. So whilst I'm very keen that we don't tie this down too tightly, it isn't quite a free-for-all. Although, looking at the people in the room, I don't expect it to be beyond the wit of any of them to argue almost anything relates to one of those themes. The question that you've got to ask yourself is, will the panel think it relates to one of those themes? I'd like to say I'm not going to be on the panel. The other thing we want you to do that's slightly different is we want you to commit to coming to a showcase. So as I say, we're trying to develop a cohort of ideas here, a cohort of partnerships, and we want there to be some interchange. So we're exploring having a showcase in the very late spring or early summer next year, where we'll bring everybody together in an event, and you'll present where you've got to so far. So some projects will be mid-flight, some projects will be finished, some projects might be in incredibly intense discussions with VCs and other funders and not be able to say anything at all. Hope not. But we want you to bear that in mind in terms of illustration, and we think it will generate some really interesting cross-fertilisation between the ideas. So that's it. It's deliberately not tightly defined. There is no bullseye to aim at here. But what we want to do is to bring together new, creative partnerships to address big problems. Somebody in one of the previous events that we've done said, I think Mark Walpott has said in his speech last week, didn't he? Big speech on UK research and innovation, saying we want people to be audacious. So I think if I'm saying, how audacious do you want us to be? And I'm not really confident with using that kind of language. I prefer, we want you to be quite out there. So on a scale of where we are now to out there, please progress steadily towards out there. So that's it. We'll take some questions. Tom, would you like to come and join me up on the stage? So that's the call. Thanks very much. And any questions? Right. Okay. There.
Can applicants apply for all three themes or just one?
So we've not had that one before.
We haven't. Yeah, you should address at least one of the themes. If you think your particular proposition speaks to all of them, go for that.
Could you repeat the question?
Certainly. The question was, can applications address more than one themes or all of the themes? And the answer was, it just needs to address at least one of the themes, but it can't do all of its themes.
And then,
you can use the microphone. Right.
so we have got the catapult squashy microphone.
Hi. Yes, it's about the venture capitalist situation, so about showcasing and about NDAs and that kind of thing. Could you elaborate on the detail of that? Because it's obvious.
So I think there's a couple of things, and Tom will probably add some technical things. So in terms of relationships between the partners, we think you should discuss them, and you should discuss the consequences of IP. We are trying to bring together partnerships at a very, very early stage. So unlike, say, with perhaps with an Innovate call, where they would recommend collaboration agreements or Lambert agreements or those kind of things, we're not going to specify that. It is a very early stage, but you do need to have those conversations. I think.
This commitment to showcase.
Yep.
And if you are in negotiation with VC, how do you then get out of the showcase, or is it the showcase with a caveat?
I think, as I say, we want people to commit to be able to showcase and talk about their projects. It is early stage. If projects have got that far in this time on that little money, I'll be really, really impressed.
Are there any requirements on the number of partners in each bid?
So no, there are no requirements. I guess things to think about are how many partners do you need to deliver what you say you're going to deliver, and make sure you can convince the panel of that. If you've got a huge number of partners, make sure that you're clear about all their roles and why they're all necessary. I guess the other limiting factor is it's not a lot of money. And so, yeah, those are your limiting factors. There's no specific number you can or can't.
I'd just say one other thing about that, which is you don't necessarily have to have all the partners in place at the application stage. So if you've got a partnership that realises it has a gap in it, but that's going to be one of the parts of the project is to identify a partner to fill that gap, then I think that's fine, because if we didn't let you do that, we'd just be replicating one of the problems we're trying to solve. Anna. Wait for the mic, here it comes.
Oh,
No, you can throw that fast.
You ready? It's many years since I was
I just wondered, is there a limit on how many applications an institution might be involved in, whether it be an academic institution or a partner or business?
So, in terms of numbers from a particular organisation, research organisation or IRR, no. Obviously, there's the restriction on people's time. We won't fund more than one FTE of anyone's time. In terms of an individual non-academic partner, again, the answer is no. What you want to think about, though, is if you're being attached to lots of different bids, make sure that your partners are happy with that too. So it's not a strict requirement to call, but it's something to think about in terms of good working with your partners.
So if it was an institution that was involved in more than one bid, it would need to have a different named person, because you wouldn't pay for people's time twice. Is that what you said?
So you could have one person named on more than one bid, that's fine. What we wouldn't do is fund more than one of their time across all funded activity, and we look at if they had any other active grants from us or from EP, we'd look at that too. So yeah, it's the standard Research Council rules in terms of time funding, but yeah, you can be on as many grants and put together as many applications you think is necessary.
I just think it's worth adding on that just to use it as an illustration of what we're trying to do here. So we're trying to get partnerships together that can essentially create proposals for really big, ambitious ideas that then can receive large-scale funding, which we'll have sorted out by then. So it's more a matter of impression. So if you're the PI and you're saying, this is the massive, audacious, ambitious idea, and here's another one, and I've got another one in my drawer as well. I think it's that kind of thing that I'm looking at. I think the position, having been involved in collaborative research and development from a business side, is the position of businesses at this stage is slightly different. So the questions that might be asked might be fundamental to the business, or the business may be a platform that could, quite sensibly partner with a number of different propositions. So I think, again, it's all think about a panel and think about the strength of the idea. Yeah, let's go to the lady in front, and then it's the gentleman down here.
Is this a one-off call for this academic year, or is it likely to be repeated?
So this is a one-off call.
Yeah, that's a new question, but yes, there'll be further funding, but it won't be in this format, and it'll be a larger scale. But when that future funding exists, having one of these development projects is not necessary for that. It won't preclude anybody. Yeah.
Hi. How is this different from a KTN project? So if you already have partnerships, business partnerships, why would you propose a bid to this instead of going for KTN funding?
So you from the business side?
No, I run a digital media arts program at the University.
Right. Okay. So I think the possibility here is the ambition here is to be quite upstream in terms of the process. So new ideas, these bigger propositions. Although the key is about them being experiences rather than technology, it's to encourage more speculative ideas at this stage, I think, and kind of new partnerships. So I think if you look at the call document, I think that's a judgment that you'll have to make as to whether this fits what you need at the moment, or there's some other mechanism.
Where do you want me to go?
Let's go here, because next time we'll go for a long range kind of throw.
Hi. if you are successful and then you commit to the showcase and you get the grant, is it released in tranches or is it all in one go, and when would it be released?
That is definitely one for you, Tom.
That's an excellent question. I imagine it'll be quarterly paid. Yeah, so the projects are 6 to 9 months. Usually the way we pay them is, goodness, it'll be how standard research grants are paid. So I think it's quarterly, and I think it might be the end of the quarter rather than the start of the quarter. I will find out the exact details. So put that in the FAQ.
We're building up a bit FAQ from all the things. So there is, because we've stopped saying this actually after 5 other gigs, but we've put this together at a lot at pace. So there are things that's very helpful that we need to actually establish. So we'll put that. We'll go back to base and put that on the FAQ.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Definitely.
You've got the mic.
Do all the partners have to be UK based?
So the answer is no. If you're thinking about academic partners, we support international co-investigators on this. Non-academic partners can be international. The question that's still outstanding is whether non-academic international partners can draw funding from the grant. So that is a question that I'm still looking for an answer for, and that will also be part of the FAQ.
I'm interested in the EPSRC involvement. How far do you expect innovation in STEM, and how far is STEM supporting?
So I think the fact that 2 research councils have come together reflects a joint ambition in this area of immersive. This specific call is about the experiences, and I think we expect the big kind of more audacious ideas will need STEM input and STEM partners, EPSRC community researchers, as fundamental to them. The architecture of that and the architecture of the partnerships, we are open. There will be people on the panel from both research communities, and it will be, I think, a lot about convincing people of the vision that you have and the questions that you're looking to answer. I think it's worth saying that in that is that the reason to do a call around experiences is the idea that experiences may pull through or give direction or needs to the technology. And that, I think, is a key thing that I think that we share an agenda on, which is certainly in the creative industries, there have been policies in the past which have looked to support research and innovation in technology to be used by the creative industries without actually asking them. And they've been surprisingly quite unsuccessful. So it's about what are the new experiences that this can enable, and then that may ask some really significant questions about the technology. At the back. Go on, go for the throw. Yes, excellent.
Thank you. I have 2 questions basically. One for the BI from the academic lead. We know that AHRC require BI to be 2 years post PhD. Is it required here as well, since it's developing a project for funding afterwards? The second question is about the partner, or does the partner need to be business, or can be another organization within academic institution?
So I can deal with both those in quite quick succession. In terms of PI eligibility, standard AHRC eligibility rules, which are in the call document. In terms of what that other partner looks like, we would just say non-academic organisation. Might be a business, that might be a registered charity, that might be something else.
So, but you could have multiples of either of those. Yeah. The basic requirement is you must have an academic lead and you must have a non-academic partner too. I think we've not had many questions from
I've got the mic here. So I was just wondering if you could say a bit more about the application process and the pitching process. So is there, I would imagine there's a screening process and then the pitching. How does the pitching work? When, where, sort of how does that happen? If you could say a bit more about that, that would be great.
Sure. So we're still sort of finding and filling this out as we go along, but I'll give you where we're up to at the moment. So in the call document, there is a week in October we've identified as the pitch meeting. Current thinking is that will be a 2-day process. We will interview as many people as we can. It'll be a pitch to a panel. We'll make sure that panel contains sufficient expertise as required from the applications. So some of that we can make a guess at now. Some of that we'll have to look at as the applications come in. It'll probably be a 10, 15-minute pitch and then a 5-10 minute Q&A, so short. And then everyone should have their outcomes by the middle of November. Yeah, I think people who are pitching will only need to turn up on one of the 2 days, do their pitch, and then they can go. I imagine it'll probably be in Swindon, but it might be in London. Exact location still TBC. It might depend on panel availability and where they are as well. Is there anything else you're after? No?
I think the only other thing to say is there may be a shortlisting because of the practicalities of doing.
Yeah.
There may be a shortlisting, and the shortlisting will be about the fit to the call, which, as you can see, may be quite interesting with it being so not nailed down.
That's a really good point to pick up on. So obviously you've seen 2 days is not a lot of time to interview lots of different people, and we're only going to end up with 25 funded projects at the end of it. My feeling is that we're going to get a lot of applications because there's a general sense of excitement in this space at the moment. So that shortlisting meeting is going to be important, and the shortlisting criteria are in that call document, but it is, as Andrew said, around fit to call. So make sure that is really well elucidated in your proposals.
Where are we going?
Hi there.
Okay,
Hi.
so let's generally go around this.
Yes, I'll throw it that way in a second.
Yeah.
So, first, I really appreciate this approach in recognizing the push certain calls put in partnerships to have to be made up out of thin air in a few weeks and so on.
Yeah, or the reverse, which is frequent flyers.
Yeah. So, but my question is about genuinely long-term partnerships that exist. Are they will they rank lower because there is an intention to generate new partnerships? Or are you also open to conversations that have already started or projects that have been discussed and haven't necessarily started? Or is it, no, it has to be something new?
There's no requirement that it's new. I think we think that it's a time and these themes will hopefully encourage some new partnerships, draw some people into these partnerships. So I'm very interested, as I say, about the idea about place. So I think any big proposition that builds around that, you need some people who run and manage buildings or landscapes. Now, so bringing those in, I think, would be really interesting. But we'd be cutting off our nose to spite our face if we were to ignore partnerships and relationships that already exist. I think it's more that by the nature of the call, we expect some new partnerships and powerful partnerships, and maybe to draw into these kind of research collaborations some new players.
Maybe just to also clarify, in terms of immersive and in terms of any sort of large, relevant, ambitious, field-defining work, timescale has been essential. Therefore, in a call that is of 6 to 9 months and intentionally short and intentionally to get something off the ground, to what extent are projects that have also started that fit the criteria being considered?
So I think that's a really interesting one, because it's always a bit of a balance, isn't it? So I don't think this funding, particularly this stage, is going to be, because of its size, is going to be particularly useful for supporting projects that are in flight. But if those are projects or ambitious large-scale projects that have, it can provide a new orientation or a big proposition to build on them, then I think that's, it would be crazy to not build on existing assets.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, if something already exists and is already attracting funding, you need to be very clear about why this required additional funding. So what are you doing new with what exists? What's the new direction? Why does this require Research Council funding if it's something that already exists and is already funded?
Right, we're going, yes. This segment will now self-organise its questions.
Okay, I just wanted to ask, have you got any social media links, to facilitate networking beyond today?
Yes, we do, and so Sam Michel, who just came into the back of the room, actually is doing this. So we've already circulated today's delegate list, but which only contains details of what you all do if you checked in. If now you want to change that and actually supply us more details, please do on that email. We're also building a mega list around all the events and all the people who've connected with us, which is going to be quite a sizable body of people. We're going to create a facility where people can at least put up a flag and say, this is what I do, I'm looking for these kind of people from this community. So we'll keep doing that and just keep contacting us if there's more that we can do. The timing of this we know is not ideal because of the summer, but the idea is to get it out before the summer break. But if there's things that we can do to support that networking, let us know.
Okay, thanks.
Right, within this section, coming forwards.
Hello, yeah, it's just a question about scale, I think. Thinking in terms of performance, you mentioned things like the RSC and so on. Because I didn't know before that you were moving towards a bigger thing later.
Yep.
Are you very keen on like the RSC, the Natural History Museum, big, massive organizations, or are you also interested in ideas with smaller performance companies or museums that model ways of working, approaches, technologies that could potentially be scaled up to swankier levels later?
So yes and yes to both of those, but I think you hit on there in your question on the issue, which is they have to have the potential to scale. And that's been, I think, a problem in the past. That certainly the Knowledge Exchange Hubs did lots and lots of projects which they were innovative. They created new research dynamics between SMEs and cultural organisations and researchers. They couldn't scale. And that's because almost the system didn't design that in as part of the objective. So the idea of having this, as it were, if you come from a media background, development funding, is to develop an idea, just as an idea, that can be judged as to whether it can scale. So that becomes an important part. And I'd be really interested in collaborations between larger and smaller institutions as well, because it seems to me that one might think that might be a way of making things scale.
I guess one of the things to pick up on that is when you're thinking about next stage funding, obviously we're talking about there is a next stage of funding coming, but the partnerships we're building don't just have to think about that as a potential next stage themselves. Obviously, EPSRC, AHRC offers responsive mode, open funding, day in, day out. Innovate has funding available, and then other funders outside of UKRI are available, venture capitalists, whatever you need. Think of this time to build these partnerships to prepare for London, for sort of larger funding propositions, but those don't necessarily have to be the one that we're talking about today. That could be any larger funding proposition.
Okay, where's the mic? Right, over there, then down here, and then we'll leave this section, and we're going to go to those people at the back there. Some of them must have a question, so...
Yeah, I've just got some concerns based on lessons that were learnt from previous projects. Two projects in particular. One, a few years ago, a European Union funded project to look at the creative sectors in London and find out why some projects worked and why some ones didn't. And it fundamentally came down to a lack of literacy in collaboration. Primarily, it wasn't down to lack of literacy in how people collaborated between agencies or anything. It was down to how people collaborated with one another within businesses and institutions, and in some instances, how individuals fail to collaborate with themselves. They end up getting in their own way a lot, and often that causes a bit of a block when it comes to creativity. But the other thing was that a year or two ago, EU-funded project was completed to do research into the creative sectors so that it could support how money was going to be spent in the Horizon 2020 project, 60 billion euros. And I was responsible for writing software to predict the futures of the creative sectors. And one of the things that came out of that was that disruption is important, and it comes about through mindset shifting and then being put into practice and finally being helped with technology. And the outcomes from that, I think, should be taken into account before people go rushing off and creating ambitious ideas, to know what the problems already are that exist out there in the industry. And they primarily seem to, again, came up, the issue was collaboration. How do people actually work together? There's so many projects that fail because people just don't work with each other well enough or get in their own way. So I just raise that as a flag, saying that if you're going to get involved in something like this, first of all, make sure you can get on with yourself and not get in your own way. And secondly, make sure the partners that you're going to work with are people who are actually literate in how to collaborate. Otherwise, you're going to find the project will get suspended, or maybe worse, you'll never have anything meaningful in terms of outcomes.
I think the warnings are really sensible, and in a way, one of the reasons to do this as a kind of development fund first is to get people to have those conversations before they commit to actually realising something together. And so the outcome of some of these projects that we do fund will be, this doesn't work. This partnership doesn't work. This objective we can't see how to do. So there'll be some degree of failure. I think we've got to entertain that if we're going to look at kind of interesting, bigger concepts. I think there was one lady down here, and then I'm hoping for some interesting questions from up there.
Thank you. Still on the question of partnerships, being from one of the bigger, swankier.
How do you feel? Do you feel comfortable with that?
We're called historic royal palaces, so I think we get.
Yeah, it's pretty swanky.
I think
pretty
we're
swanky.
But also being aware that we work with a lot of tiny partners and actually have to encourage them to create structures and become companies. They're so tiny. And so my question about the research is, are you answering pure research questions, which will often be about how technology is used with live or whatever? Or can some of the questions that we answer be structural as well, like how we do help these partnerships happen or sustain them? I'm thinking about, we've got an R&D studio, for example, and so we're really interested about how, what kind of structures and models and way that we all work together.
So I think for you as a partner, it's important, probably just the way you express it, that you address both those questions. Inevitably, I think the only requirement here is that it's done through working towards some new immersive experience as a way of crystallising those ideas. So I'm only being a pretend academic. Research questions always scare me. So I tend to think of it as practice-based research. Can we come together around, well, there's awful words like envisioning a project and develop the research question for the research partners, develop research questions through that. But for the business partners or the practitioners, they don't necessarily have to conceive of it as research questions. It's just, what happens if we do this? How does it work? What would need to be in place for us actually to even deliver a part of it? So I think for different partners have different, I guess, different needs from these kind of partnerships. And so, again, with this development funding, is use it to explore the questions that you have. But the output, but for the future funding, try and work out what that experience would be that would test those.
I guess something else that might be worth thinking about is think of the funders that are behind this call. Obviously, you've got AHRC and EPSRC jointly funding this. Make sure that you locate your proposition within their remits. So that's not, and if your questions are solely around questions of economics and of business practice, that's an ESRC question. So if that's just the focus of your proposal, maybe this isn't the place, but if it's part of your proposal, that's fine. But think about your proposal as a whole and think about who's putting the money towards the call as a whole.
How are we doing? Have you got any more burning questions? Okay, let's see if we can do that in one throw.
If the applications, is there a regional spread, or will you be picking them based on? Will they be coming from all over the UK? And is that a criteria?
They will be coming from all over the UK. That's why we've made a deliberate attempt to get around the UK to publicise it and engage with people's questions. It's not a requirement. We don't have any regional spread in mind. Although, if you say to the end, I'll say something about what we are thinking of doing that specifically intervenes in that area.
How's your throat?
I don't think mine's any better.
Right, okay, after this one, we're going all the way to the back, and we're going to do it through the audience. Kind of mic surfing.
Hello, thank you for your talk. So my talk is regarding your last comment that you did when you finished your presentation on projects that are really out there and projects that you're kind of like in that safe zone for it to get funded. My question is how much the projects that get in are rooted into the business, or how much are the projects are based on embracing the true potential of these immersive technologies to expand our perception of reality and of ourselves, and kind of like how to integrate this kind of movement and this kind of like reunion that we're having together to state the current crisis that we're going on, and how can we help each other to, to embrace this potential.
So I think what we're trying to say is we've got some core things that we want to look at, what we're trying to bring together. So we think these, so hence the themes. And we think that it is about collaboration because the knowledge and expertise is distributed in different places within research. If you want to address really big questions, that's great, as long as it relates to one of these themes. So I think there's a really interesting thing about narrative in this and stories, and I think particularly about contested stories, how we can tell stories in immersive spaces, I think is a question, but the potential for telling contested stories, different stories, contemporary problematic stories, I think is immense. So I think we don't want to exclude any of those things, as long as they have the requirements of the partnership and they address one of the themes. And that's perhaps something that Zillah Watson from the BBC and I will talk about on the panel, is how this stuff can work in a contested space. Right, all the way back there, in 4 throws, please. Well, that was 1. 2. Right, now. Excellent. Well done.
Okay. Hi. I guess my question revolves around the nature of the project, because there are 2 things in the call document that struck me, and considering it's an arts and humanities at its core kind of project that you're aiming for, there were 2 things that struck me almost like, but they were like footnotes, and I thought, well, I'm going to seize on those. And one was around social inclusion, and the other one was around the leaving of some kind of cultural legacy. And I just wondered if you could say more about that and how important those things are to you.
Tom, you wrote the call document.
I did. So to me, they're very important. That's why they're in the call document. I guess. So are you asking how will that score in terms of how projects are ranked?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, as I say, they were just kind of thrown in there, and for me, those are quite important things. And I wondered how necessary they were, or whether how open to interpretation, this kind of thing.
So they're very open to interpretation. That call document is written in a big, broad way because we want people to try and locate themselves within the themes. I think they're as important as you. I mean, I think they're important. I think you need to convince the panel of their importance. We haven't given any strict guidance to the panel yet because the panel doesn't exist yet, and the criteria on which they'll be scoring the applications is within the call document.
I think the core concerns of AHRC, I mean, the cultural value project, that exploration is an important thing. I think for this particular call, I suppose they apply to the bigger project that you're trying to explore and why it's important for that. I don't think I think taking it too literally and thinking of a legacy for a small development grant would be crazy. But I think if you can illustrate those in terms of the ambitions, it really will help the panel contextualise as to what you're aiming to do. So if they're core values for you, I think bring them out in that. Okay, we've got a few more minutes for further questions, and let's go to these two here on the way back to this lady over here.
Can we do 2 stages?
I have a question regarding the showcase. So, and also in the spirit of projects leaving behind some cultural impact, what exactly is the nature of the showcase? If a project or partnership has a narrative immersive experience that's ready for audiences, is the showcase an appropriate place for that? Or if in fact the audience is part of the research project, in that getting audiences in is part of the data collection that's represented in the research, and the story, the narrative is just the way to get people in. Is the showcase an appropriate place for that, or should projects also be looking for a venue to put performances on, for example, or to install some digital fabric?
So I think this talks a bit, so when we talked about prototyping, we don't have fixed ideas about everybody must do a prototype prototype with audiences. People will take that differently. So the requirement, the output on that side, and the requirement for the showcase is to be able to talk about the big idea and illustrate it in some way, the way you best. So if that's a kind of prototype experience as part of a showcase, fantastic. We are in discussions, it's not now, but we're in discussions with Crossover Labs, who do the VR/AR strand at Sheffield Dockfest, about possibly aligning our showcase with their immersive festival. So it's like a research strand. That's an exciting conversation, but it's not nailed down. And I think once we've got the projects, we can have a sensible conversation about the showcase. So if what you want to showcase involves a site-specific work in Orkney, then we're going to have to think about that, about how you can showcase that to another audience. There was,
Yeah, it's possible I missed this because I was buggering about on Twitter. But in terms of the purpose for which the immersive experiences are intended, I haven't heard you rule education either in or out. Was that just lax attention on my part, or is education as the purpose of an immersive experience in or out of this call?
So we've got 3 themes.
Memory, place, and if I can get it in somewhere, then.
And if the experience's purpose around those themes has an education function, grand.
Thank you.
So just while the mic moves around, we actually have a question from social media. The question is, when business is mentioned, does that require it to be fully commercial, or do museums, galleries, etc. count? Museums, galleries, etc. do count.
Okay, and my question is about the costing. It's about the maximum 20% that it says on the call that could go to non-academic organisations. And I take the point about how it's not the purpose of these funds to support business activity that would already have been going to happen. But if the non-academic partner is a national portfolio organisation supported by the Arts Council, they already have committed to quite a detailed plan of activity for which some funds are in place, but part of their remit is to find other funds. And if a project is planned that has the potential to be adapted and slanted towards this call, so it's not already going down this line, but I see the potential to sort of map onto that and use it, does that count as activity that could be supported through that money? Because it hasn't got the funding in place, it needs funding to happen, but it is already, up to a point, part of that organisation's planned activity, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, so I don't think there's an exclusion there. I think Tom's words about thinking about the purpose of this funding and projects that are in flight is kind of pertinent. So the key is not so much is it possible, as can it be aligned with the objectives of this programme, which is about developing bigger concepts and ideas rather than at this stage funding realisation. I think that will be the thing that will weigh in the mind of the panel, is this funding contributing to exploring on a provisional level a big idea?
Oh, yeah.
Or is it being diverted to fund a project that's kind of realised in its own right?
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So that's right. I thought you were going to ask a slightly different question, which was about the 20, the limits on 20%, and I thought I might take the opportunity actually to just explain that. So the Research Council, the standard Research Council position is all recipients of the grant must be funds for the grant are academic researchers, and so we've gone quite a long way with the two councils to include a specific non-academic partner funding stream in this. In future funds, we would not like it to be as restricted as it is, but that involves delivering a wider partnership across what will be UKRI, so that we can not only have funding going to non-academic partners that's appropriate for their input, but that we can have projects led by non-academic partners. So this, again, is a constraint of it being a preliminary development fund, but we have to fix that.
I guess also it's probably worth saying that you will note that in the core document that non-academic partners who can take funding from the grant are reasonably heavily caveated. If you have questions around whether or not you fall into those categories, the best place to probably do that is to drop me an email, and we'll be also publishing an FAQ and we'll update that. If we get a lot of questions around a certain point, we'll update that to cover that.
Okay, probably do a couple more questions, or maybe not. Anybody else? Okay. If not, then let's have a coffee break, and then we'll come back and perhaps we've got a rather interesting panel who will give their take on what they're doing in this area. Thank you. Some of the ideas and look at them from different descriptions. So we've got Omaid Hiwaizi, who is Global Head of Experience Strategy. You can't get much more immersive than that.
A mouthful.
For Blippar. Zillah Watson, who... Can we say what your new title is yet, Zillah, or is that...
Yeah.
What is it?
It's commissioning editor for VR at the BBC and head of the BBC's new VR hub.
Okay, so that's much more exciting than the mysterious title that was on the documentation, but worth bringing out. And Dr. Anna Whitelock, who's a colleague from Royal Holloway, reader in public history, but as with all historians, is really a kind of storyteller and media star as well. So we're going to look at that from different directions. But I thought, Omaid, we'd start with you, because I suppose Blippar have become known, as one of the players in augmented reality, a particular flavour of, but with experiences based on visual recognition. But what do you think? What is your core business going forward? Is it creating experiences, or is it enabling other people's experiences?
Yeah, we're very much an ecosystem where we see our role in the, I guess what will end up being the mixed reality space as being the enabler and the catalyst for others to invent the use cases and scale the use cases. To that end, we still obviously have our core app, which, a couple of variants of that, but then we very deliberately uncoupled it into SDK and content creation tools, and uncoupled all of the computer vision API technology so that it can all be used in creative and different ways. And we very much embrace, the commercial agency and then creative and academic marketplaces to enable them to grab the technology and use it, start play with it, see what's possible.
Okay, so I think that so you've got a particular perspective on this, and Zillah, perhaps a different one. You did a report recently for the Reuters Institute about how media organisations can develop the uses of immersive, and indeed what they're actually doing. So I'd recommend anybody to have a look at that report, because it's fabulously informative. But I think you also addressed some quite significant challenges for how media organisations can use immersive. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? without necessarily referencing the BBC.
No, I'll talk about other organisations because there is obviously great excitement from lots of newspapers, news organisations and broadcasters about virtual reality, and particularly in the world of virtual reality journalism, although that's by no means what the only thing. I mean, you'll see in the New York Times app, they're also doing meditation, VR, and various other things that in news world would come down to sort of features and beautiful documentaries and things like that. But there are some real problems. I mean, one of the things is most news organisations are not doing proper VR yet. They are doing 360 video, which is mostly being consumed in browsers or on smartphones. Using magic windows. And there's a big question in my mind. It's seen as a gateway to VR, but is that a gateway to VR? Is seeing a 360 video in a browser suddenly going to make people want to buy a VR headset and put it on? So that's one challenge. There's also going to be serious questions about monetization and things like that for broadcasters and news industry. Who's going to pay for this? Could it be sustained through brand promoted content or through advertising? Lots of questions. But the biggest question, and I guess one I will be focusing on, is about understanding of audiences and what they want from VR, and what sort of content, frankly, is going to make people really want to buy or indeed put on a VR headset once a week, once a day, how you will establish that habit for this new technology.
So audiences is also, I think, a thing for you, Anna, because you've, like, it seems many historians have used the media, particularly television, to engage audiences. Your own area is a public history one. So what excites you about this, as you know, as an academic, but also as a communicator?
Well, I think, first of all, I mean, this is a platform for content and for academic content, and particularly, I suppose, of interest to me is history content and heritage content. And, you know, for a long time I've been thinking there's so much investment and interest in, you know, gaming, for example, that creates these kind of virtual worlds, virtual historic worlds. And you know, it's surprising how little relationship they have with direct historians as kind of input in that. So I think this is another opportunity to share the content of research. And I think you mentioned academic marketplace, and I think academics need to increasingly see themselves as actually having a commodity which they can sell, as it were, or work alongside these technology partners. I am developing at the moment, I run the London Centre for Public History and Heritage at Royal Holloway, and I'm developing a number of heritage projects, projects with different heritage institutions. And also at the moment I'm working to develop projects with and for Chinese consumers. And I'm on a massive learning curve, literally over the last few days, thinking about how the Chinese, particularly when they come to England and to heritage institutions, what they expect, what they want, how they consume content. And for example, I'm learning that, you know, they consume so much through their mobile phones, and it's through VR codes seems to be absolutely key. And if you, in China, if you go to museums, that seems to be how they sort of unlock the virtual world. So I think, I mean, to pick up on your point, I mean, I think to understand audiences is absolutely critical, and understand the sort of consumer and the user, and not expect there to be a kind of only a one-size-fits-all solution. And actually what might work perhaps for a particular age group or a particular audience type, nationality and so on, might not be right and apply for others. Of course, there's always the issue of language too. There's the issue, for example, with China, that just being able to access content over here from within China is problematic. So there's lots of things that I think it's important to think about. But ultimately, I mean, I think that, you know, what's really interesting here is it's about stories, it's about narrative, and it's about content. And I would just encourage those who are kind of coming from the sort of techie aspect to, you know, look to the academic sector as being absolutely full and rich of content. And I say academic heritage sector, and I also mean, you know, heritage institutions and so on, because all the content is there, the stories are there, the narrative is there, the amazing research is there, the characters are there, everything's there. What academics need is your expertise to kind of unlock it.
Okay, so that's a really brilliant pitch from an academic to the research and academic knowledge can play into this area. These themes that we've chosen, the memory, place, and performance. have we chosen the right themes? Can you see how we can bring those alive?
Well, certainly there's quite a lot of overlap when I was listening earlier on with the kind of use cases that we've been developing, particularly around memory in place. Actually, performance I think is a bit more committed, and obviously you need to work very, very closely with the creative directors to think about that. And I would imagine a performance would have a net new piece of innovation to stand out, whereas the others potentially are more scalable, let's say. I think there's an interesting piece actually around across all of that, which is to do with the level of the level of immersiveness, actually, and I think that, and it plays across the three categories too. I would say that immersiveness is a continuum, and it's really easy to focus on the far end, when in fact, what we found is that if you go shallow and then build, and then try and build more time over, then actually it's much more, you're more likely to get it away. This may also be that we've had most success around commercial implementations, but truth is, do you want 50 people to do something, or do you want 2 million to do something? And it was interesting you shared the DigiCapital market data. For me, the interesting numbers there are to do with the user numbers. So on the AR side, they talk about billions, and on the VR side, they talk about tens of millions. That's a direct function of how much time people want to spend wearing a headset versus having a shallower experience on a smartphone. And I would just encourage you to not, to think broadly about what the use cases are and how deep they need to be, and whether you can kind of take people on a journey. I mean, I may disagree a little with Zillah's point of view, but certainly that's our experience in the commercial world.
I think that is a big thing that comes out of your report, Zillah, is the level of immersion. So particularly in journalism, I think is a challenge, isn't it? Because we've had some NGOs have developed very immersive experiences to deliver empathy to quite small audiences. For journalists, it's about larger audiences.
Yeah, but for broadcasters and news organisations, they're basically making a decision between quality or reach. And if you want to get to a larger audience, you end up pushing down the immersion. But in terms of stories that work and the themes that you've chosen, I mean, I interviewed all the main VR editors from different news organisations. The New York Times has been doing this since November 2015 on a big scale. And the simplest exposition I found of which stories worked was from somebody from the German tabloid Bild, and he said it's be there or be them. And be there is absolutely about locations and taking you there to see what it's like for yourself to be at the heart and centre of a story and feel what it's like to be standing there. And be them is with people, and it might be about memories, and might be, so I think they're very apt.
Because you're all located in different bits of this space, I think one of the things that we're aware of with this call is bringing people from different disciplines together, and perhaps what we're trying to do with the call is give them the space to get to know each other. Perhaps starting with you, Zillah, what do you think are the challenges of bringing that dialogue together? You've got a very practical experience of this within a large organisation like the BBC, bringing even those different disciplines together.
Well, the exciting thing about VR at the moment is the fusion of different skills required, whether it's from gaming, whether it's from... Sorry, is that better? Is that closer? Sorry, the exciting thing about VR for me at the moment is the fusion of different skills it's bringing together, from computer science, from television, from gaming, and the usual challenge you get when you're doing that is you've got to try and speak the same language. Everyone has different ways of doing things, different ways of managing projects, and the starting point is coming together and working out how to talk the same language, and that's my top tip.
Or acknowledge that there's different language or different ways of expressing that language, or in fact different languages for different audience, I think. I mean, I would say in terms of challenges perhaps that I think perhaps there could be a misconception that, within the academic sector, from people outside, that everybody's kind of doing scholarly things and, in libraries and archives and writing. But, for example, just at Royal Holloway, I know, the media arts department, for example, and computer science are involved in development of really cutting edge projects and technology and ideas and, immersive experiences and understanding. And so I think it's important that those from outside the sector really kind of embrace an academic sector with open arms and actually have a look across departments about the levels of expertise actually within the academic sector, and indeed people that have had professional experience, non-academic experience, that then come into the academic sector. So there's probably, that could be quite surprising to people. I think from a sort of academic point of view, I'm just so ignorant about all of this stuff and find myself, talking and trying to talk in a way that makes me sound as though I know what I'm talking about when I really don't. I mean, I'm just learning things all the time. And I know, for example, that when we think about VR, just talking to someone just now, we don't have to think about headsets. You can think about, engaging through gloves and things on your feet to, engage with sort of other senses rather than just things that you might hear or see. So I think it's trying to find a common language and also, to be kind of kind to each other about levels of ignorance and understanding, and people in the sort of techie sector not expecting people who are completely not in that world to immediately understand.
Well, what I find interesting at Blippar is even within Blippar, people use the same word for different things. And I would say, from our point of view, from my point of view, getting environments where those misunderstandings can happen is actually the creative space. And in many ways, pulling people together and coming up with these great ideas is really important, but actually working out what the go-to-market in the operational model is in many ways the bigger barrier. We've done thousands of commercial campaigns for millions of dollars. We haven't done a lot of artistic, creative ones. And it's not because the funding isn't there, the will isn't there, it's the operational issues. And, getting things to happen and the various logistical barriers around those kind of organizations just seem to come up one after the other. And it's frustrating because it's so rich, and all these art establishments and academic establishments with all this amazing content, but turning that into experiences that you can scale, I feel hugely frustrated, and it's very exciting to be here thinking that actually maybe we could go on this journey.
Can I just add one thing? I mean, I think we also need to be aware that there's a responsibility, even in a virtual world, about what we create when we're thinking about perhaps historic environments or heritage environments. It's not all fiction. And I think we have to be careful that we don't commit some sort of cultural vandalism, or we walk into contested areas and aren't acknowledging those. When we impose a narrative on a particular space, that is potentially problematic. We're choosing a version of events or how things looked at a particular time. And by definition, that's going to exclude potentially other perspectives. So, I mean, there's a great opportunity to obviously showcase what's there and what was there. But there's a lot of contested issues to think about. And I do think that it's important not to kind of show a sort of degree of responsibility. And as I say, this sort of idea of a kind of, virtual vandalism in this space, I think we have to guard against that too.
I think that's a really interesting point. I've had several conversations about that with people here today. Zillah, do you see that as an issue for in terms of narrative, in terms of a conflict between the immersion, the compelling, the high kind of high production value experience, and then the different versions, different stories?
Absolutely, and I just think that it's a sort of expanded problem beyond the one that we have in television. You're now used to, when you see a reconstruction in television, you now have a label comes up and says reconstruction to remind you that what you're seeing is not reality. And we have to deal with that issue in immersive worlds. And we've already started to deal with that. We've from the BBC, we've had experiences like Easter Rising, which Dan Tucker over there produced, which dealt with a sort of fairly partial view of Irish history. I mean, it raises all sorts of challenges. Yeah, I don't think they're unfamiliar though in broadcast in terms of the regulatory framework we work to. So I think they're possible to do. It just means that we'll probably play safer for a while than some other people can afford to do.
say this conversation is careering towards the legal issues and adding a digital layer to the world around you, which is keeping our lawyers kind of busy.
Care to expand on that?
Well, I mean, there's a load of unproven law around passing off, around ownership of particular brand icons or brand objects. And then obviously there's challenges around if you do add content to it, who has the right sign off of that content, and if you have different platforms, they can provide different content, and there's, that's probably as far as I'll go. But the point is, there's a load of interesting kind of scenarios.
I think that's a really interesting area, because perhaps to contrast what we think of now as virtual reality versus augmented reality, because I suppose the defining thing about augmented reality is it's taken out into the real world, and that will bring with it different problems from creating a world into which the audience enter, but it's closed.
Yeah. Yes, I think so. I think the fact that there's a physical kind of context of the content experience attaches it to things, which presents a whole series of interesting questions.
Cool. So I could ask you, each of you, what fab project that you'd like to do addressing these themes, but perhaps you wouldn't tell me because you want to keep that secret or you want to find partners. But what I'm saying, going to close, just as a kind of closing question, is I always think in areas where I've worked in the past, there's always a project that you wish someone else would do, because it would bring things alive or it would solve a problem. And it's not one you want to solve yourself, but it would be really helpful if someone else did it, just to either demonstrate it worked or it didn't work. I'm just wondering, could each of you offer a project that you'd really like to emerge from this programme, but not necessarily one you'd like to do yourself? Go on, Anna. You know.
Well, I mean, I'd like to be involved in it, but I'd like someone to develop it. I mean, it's just an idea. I mean, I just.
Well, you'd like to front it when it works.
I just would like to get, all the benefits from it without any of the costs. So I've had this conversation with Angie before. I've always struck by brown signs around the country. Where that there's some kind of heritage site there. And I think it would be great. And then I'm aware that, on Google Maps, you can find out where that a local petrol station is or a supermarket, but you can't find out where a local kind of heritage site is. So if there was some way of creating a kind of web of digital brown signs, or that you every time you saw a brown sign, it connected and opened up a sense of what was going on. So the sort of mapping, the digitized version of the brown sign system. You heard it here first. I'm claiming it, but I'm happy to explore it with anybody. I mean, it seems big, and I've sort of had a very preliminary conversation with Google about it, but I'm really keen to kind of find people who actually know the steps to make that happen. But that would seem to be a really great national idea.
So this is place, but we're talking about a data layer across the whole of the UK that's immersive, queued by all those locations.
Yeah.
Good. It's ambitious.
So I've placed in memory, I'd like to bring museums and historical sites alive with memories and excitement for people going around to see what they used to be like, and to really take people on flights of imagination there, to bring new meaning to them.
Omaid, you've got an ecosystem, so what would you like people to develop into it, I guess?
Okay. I haven't actually got a very good answer to this, I'm afraid, but I would love an art gallery or a museum to do a highly committed digital layer on a permanent exhibit where you curate the AR content as part of the physical curation process. And it's having a smartphone to view content or some other technology isn't seen as a secondary thing. It's part of the experience, and it's expected that most people will do it. And it's almost like there's more interesting content in the digital layer than there is in the physical one. So it's a highly differentiated, very digital or hybrid experience. And I think it's waiting to be done. the kind of shallower stuff that we've done, can I just sort of say, because it doesn't necessarily have to be to that level. Last year we did this thing called Shakespeare Everywhere, which was in conjunction with the British Council, where we took a load of, I think, 100 everyday objects, and King's College PhD students, Shakespeare PhD students, researched Elizabethan and Shakespearean facts. We attached them to these everyday objects so that you could scan things, and you understood what they were using a visual search technology, and then there was this kind of layer of Shakespearean insight and Elizabethan insight. So that's quite shallow, but equally very, very interesting, you know, and lots and lots of activity on that. So I would, you know, I've got, I guess I'm kind of saying you guys come up with the ideas and we'll help you make them happen.
Okay, thank you. So I think there's a real coherence about those ideas. So we've got a digital layer that goes across the whole of the UK. There's bringing things alive, either in at scale, in locations, or in constrained spaces. But I think one of the things I'm taking away from this, and I think might be in the language of how we now talk about this call, is this phrase that Omaid, that you've used, which is committed. Mm-hmm. So I think that is it relates to the idea of scale, but I think it says something very powerful that we've done lots of things that are small and unsustainable, and perhaps what we're trying to do here is move that forward into things that are committed in time and space.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I think it requires from all the partners in these bids kind of deep understanding as well, you know, of what they're trying to do and each other's kind of contribution. I think that's key, and, you know, whether it be you're working in a historic environment, landscape, gallery, you really need to understand the physical space before you kind of go into the virtual one.
Great. I think we'll leave it there. I'd like to thank the panel for their insights. So Zillah, Anna, Omaid, thank you very much. I just wanted to in these closing remarks, trail something else that we've been at the start of the morning. I talked a little bit about what our strategy was about trying to develop a creative economy program, and I mentioned clusters, and I just wanted to share with you, and particularly those of you who are in the university sector, something that we'll be announcing in the next couple of weeks, and we can now, for the first time, talk about. So, as I say, we've been very interested in the idea around clusters, and in all the engagement that was done around the industrial strategy, the idea of creative clusters and how research and innovation could drive those or contribute to them kept coming out, and perhaps there's been very interesting work describing where these clusters are, and perhaps starting to describe how they work. Like the Creative England and Nesta's report, Geography of Creativity in the UK, which produced this long list of clusters. But the question is, how do we, with that insight that the creative industries do cluster in, some people call them self-sustaining ecosystems. I'm not sure that's ever going to quite catch on as a snappy title. But what can we do to drive that forward? So, in the next 2 weeks, we think at the moment, there'll come out a highlight notice initially to the university sector, which will announce what's currently called the Creative Clusters Programme. So this is really exciting, large-scale programme led by the AHRC on behalf of the other research councils to create new research partnerships embedded within creative clusters. So to give you a sense of scale, depending on how you count it, because there's lots of different ways of counting new money, old money, it's between 40 and 80 million pounds. And it's the desire is to set up 8 research centres, labs, you could think of them in various different ways, at the heart of creative clusters that are either defined by geography or sector, and develop research programs out of those over the next 5 years. So this is going to be quite an accelerated program. So there'll be a full call announcement in September, and then we'll be off around the country again trying to bring together these partnerships. The only things we know at the moment is that they must be industry academic partnerships. They're going to be anchored in an HEI, but we're going to expect them to show that they can bring together local economic development, whether that's city region or London Mayor or devolved administrations in Scotland, and kind of coordinate a research programme for that cluster. What that research program is going to come, is not going to be defined by us. It's going to come from the relationships within it. So it's a really exciting program. It's big scale. It's the first real commitment of industrial strategy money to the creative industries. And that's probably all we can say about it at the moment, but there'll be more information coming around in the next couple of weeks. So with that, thanks very much for attending. Please carry on those conversations. I know there's lots of people in the room want to talk about what they do and find partners to explore some of these ideas. So please go ahead. Thank you.